Hello, pattern readers. I am here to break down last week's big Wheel of Time TV show news with you. I'm going to talk about everything Rafe Judkins had to say at his Comic-Con panel, the Moiraine teaser poster, the season 1 release date, when to expect a trailer, and more. It should be surprising to no one that I have a lot of thoughts. Let me first assure you, though, that this video will be safe to watch whether you have read any of the Wheel of Time books or not. It will contain some speculation about what we might see in season 1, and very briefly at one point I will mention a spoiler from late in book 1, but I'll warn you at that point if you need to skip ahead a little. Let's start with the poster. It may not be the first thing you notice, but the most important piece of information here is the release month of November 2021. Even though there's a tinge of disappointment for me that we don't have an exact date yet, I am very glad to have it narrowed down significantly. And November is exactly what I had been predicting based on previous information that we had had. One of the reasons I'm really glad to have this information is that it explains why we haven't seen a trailer yet and why Amazon would opt not to show one at Comic-Con. As I went into in my last video, the strategy that Amazon Prime Video seems to be using to market its original shows recently is to do a major marketing push in the 2 to 3 months prior to release, and the trailer is usually released in that window. So if you're someone who's still worried about the fact that we haven't seen a trailer yet, just remember that we have about 4 months to go. And from the perspective of Amazon and Sony, that's probably just too soon. They're going to want it to be really fresh in people's minds and not to give them a chance to forget about it in the meantime. Now, let's talk about the image itself. The thing that will perhaps jump out first is the fact that the character of Moiraine, as played by Rosamund Pike, is the focus. If you've been following any of the press about the show, this shouldn't be all that surprising. The official plot summary of the show, which has been used pretty much anywhere you read about it for years, puts Moiraine as central to the story. Rosamund Pike was the first actor announced as attached to the show, and she was announced singularly, rather than with any other actors. Despite the presence of some other globally popular and/or acclaimed actors in the show, including Alvaro Morte, Daniel Henney, and Sophie Okonedo, Pike still brings the biggest combination of star power and prestige to the project. Now, on the other hand, it might come as a surprise to some book readers who haven't been following the press. No spoilers here, but of the characters who are most prominent in the first book, I don't think anyone would select Moiraine as the main character. In fact, there's another character who has the majority of the POV chapters. There are a few other characters who get some perspective chapters in the Eye of the World, but Moiraine only has one, very brief one, at the end. In fact, there are no books in the series outside of the prequel New Spring where Moiraine is anywhere close to being the most frequent POV character. That's not to say that she's not an important character, just that we spend relatively less time in her perspective. Couple of caveats here. There is nothing to suggest that Moiraine as a character in the show will be a central focus throughout. It's likely only in the first season or 2 that they would give her a prominence above others. Yet it does make sense to capitalize upon the name and the reputation that Rosamund Pike brings to the show, and to make Moiraine central to their storytelling and their marketing of the show at first. If you are someone who is concerned about the kind of changes that might be entailed in giving Moiraine some additional focus, I highly recommend that you watch this video that I did on how to adapt Moiraine, because there might be other reasons why it would make sense as well, but it gets into spoiler territory. So check out this video as well as how to adapt The Dragon Reborn. Now let's talk about what is surrounding Moiraine, and I want to share with you the text description that was provided by the official show account when they shared the image on Twitter, because it clears up one point of debate. If you're not familiar with alt text, it is a text description that can be embedded in an image, and it's used by people who use screen readers, which would otherwise not be able to tell them what is in the image. It would show up just as a blank to them. The poster depicts an iconic moment from the Eye of the World. Moiraine, standing beneath slowly moving clouds and wrapped in a blue cloak that is blowing in the wind with its hood down, looks over her shoulder at the audience as she steps through a waygate into the unknown. She's inviting us to go on a journey with her. So this structure that Moiraine is stepping through is a waygate. Again, I'm not surprised by the information because it was the speculation I and many others had after seeing leaked photos of this set piece back in the late winter of 2020 when they were filming there. Based on information provided by the travelers who snagged and shared some pictures of it and witnessed some filming, it seemed pretty clear that was what we were looking at. What was surprising to me at first was seeing it here on the poster looking pretty much exactly as it had looked in those previous photos. I have always speculated that the rest of the waygate, what we think of as the gate itself, would be added in later with digital effects into the scene. Because as it is now, it doesn't look like what we have a description for of the waygate at all. Where are the carvings that look like stone that seem to come to life when a trefoil leaf key is put in place? Where does it open up to reveal a shimmery but murky surface that travelers have to walk through? There are two possibilities here. One, all of those missing elements that I just mentioned will still be included in the scene when we actually see it, but were not included in the poster, perhaps for multiple reasons. And second is a major design change. I'll be honest, as open as I am to changes in general, knowing that they're often necessary and make an adaptation better, in this case, I am hoping for the former. I would really love to see the waygate as it is described. Maybe there is a practical reason why they would choose not to do so, but I'm still hoping for it in the scene. The main thing I would say is that I am as close to certain as possible that this image we have is not a still from the show. It does not depict an actual scene that we will get. So the absence of the gate should not be taken as proof that it will be absent in the show. Also worth noting that apparently the writers take some inspiration from their travels, if we can judge from this photo that Katie Sadai shared on Instagram from their writers' retreat in Bali in 2019, which shows a temple that looks an awful lot like this waygate. Now, in terms of the impact this image has as a poster, I like it a lot. Showing just the frame or pillars of the waygate makes for a cleaner and striking image. That sense of stepping through to something powerful and mysterious and unknown is communicated. I love the light that comes pouring through in that open space. I love the stark contrast of the clouds, which you may or may not have noticed, are in a dark and light motif, which calls to mind the contrast between saidin and saidar in the ancient symbol of Aes Sedai, which was also based on the yin-yang. Having Moiraine standing in that open space, we can clearly see the way she's facing forward but turning back to invite us to follow. It's effective and, in my opinion, a beautiful image. So I really like it as a poster. Some last details to note in the image. In the foreground, lower left corner, we have some threads, and it is not explained in the description what these are. My guess would be that they are weaves of saidar, so these could be the first look we are given of what channeling will look like in the show. That's a whole longer discussion that could be had about this, honestly. But if we look close and increase the contrast, we can see that there are subtly different colors in the threads, including at least blue, yellow, and red, which would likely correspond with the different powers of water, air, and fire. If there's some green or white in there, which is harder to tell, then there would also be earth and spirit. There are other possibilities and implications for this if it is weaves of channeling, so be sure to share your thoughts on it in the comments. Close to the weaves, you can also see that a part of the waygate seems to be disintegrating. I'll briefly mention a spoiler for late in book 1 here, so if you need to, go ahead and skip to this timestamp if you need to avoid that. So if this set was used for the scene when they're exiting the ways through the waygate near Faldara, as I suspect, then this all could have to do with the channeling Moiraine has to do in order to get them out, and perhaps there is damage done to the waygate itself. That could explain the threads of saidar as well as this bit of damage here. It could even explain why we don't see the gate itself. The only other theory I could come up with is that this whole image is instead more thematic and is showing the pattern itself starting to break down, threads unraveling, matter disintegrating, but that seems like a little bit too much of a stretch for season 1. What do you think? Now let's dig into this interview Rafe gave as part of the panel, because there was some exciting stuff that I could honestly hardly take in the first time I watched it. He talked about how he has a personal connection to the books, having started reading them when he was a young gay kid in Utah, and he connected to the characters as also experiencing what it's like to be different in the world. He also talked about how he chased the idea of working on this show long before it was a reality, bugging his agent until Sony finally got the rights and they brought it to Amazon. So this is one of the things that has given me the most confidence in the production, knowing that the most important person who's making creative decisions on the show is a huge fan with a personal connection to the characters and the story and a commitment to making a great TV show out of it. He cares about getting it right from multiple angles. He was also asked about how closely the show would stick to the books. And of course, this is a question that weighs heavily on a lot of fans' minds. There's nothing he said here that he hasn't said before, but if you want a good summary of Rafe's perspective, here it is.
Obviously, I want to stay as close to the books as we possibly can. You know, these are really beloved books, but I love them. There's a great story there. We want to tell it, and we want to tell it in the way that's best for television. Like, this really is a true adaptation of the series. So there will be a lot of things that are different from the books, certainly, but I think it always stays true to the heart of the books and the spine of the storytelling.
So essentially, stay as close to the books as possible, but also tell the story in a way that is best for television. He mentioned more specifically the characters as part of the heart of the story and the richness of their interior lives and their agendas that people will connect to and make for good television. He also touched on diversity in casting, and he felt that that was important in order to honor the books. When The Wheel of Time first came out, it was the most diverse fantasy book that had ever been out there. And so he wants the show to also be the most diverse fantasy show that has been on television before. This has, unfortunately, been a hot button topic in the Wheel of Time fandom, even since early casting announcements were made in 2019. So I have discussed this at length previously, as have other content creators that I respect. And all I can say at this point is if you truly think that most of the casting decisions are wild departures from book descriptions, you're incorrect. A few of them, sure. Most of them, no. And if you want to come at me in the comments section over that, please at least do your homework first. Watch this video that I did on the controversy. Watch this video that Daniel Green and Matt Hatch did where they actually dug into Robert Jordan's notes. And watch this video from Leslie Nerdy talking about her experience reading fantasy as a person of color. Last word for now on the diversity in casting. There was a global search for actors. They looked at tons of people for the major roles. If you think that they couldn't find truly talented people to embody the characters after all that, what do you think they went to all that effort for? I can't wait to see this cast on screen, starting with Rosamund Pike, especially the more Rafe talks about how passionate she is about Moiraine. Rafe says when he first spoke with her, he knew that she was the only choice for Moiraine because she knew the character in her bones in a fundamental way. Their very first conversation, the first words out of her mouth were, "Rafe, I know this woman. I can be this woman." And he calls her the best foundation that the show could ever hope for. Honestly, hearing more about how committed Rosamund Pike is to this role and the show was wonderful. I think if you look at her career, she chooses her projects carefully. And this is an important role for her. She's also a producer on the show, and it's going to be a longer commitment than a lot of her other projects. So I think having her on board is going to go a long way towards the success of the show. So speaking of Moiraine, you might have noticed, maybe we're a little bit bothered by the way that Rafe Judkins pronounced the character's name. Moiraine? We couldn't, of course, avoid noticing this, and I have to comment on it. Mainly, I'm going to just say, let's not freak out, okay? There are, of course, going to be disagreements about how to pronounce characters' names. That's like what fandom 101. We can't agree on how to pronounce anything. I'll just throw this out there for you. This is a little clip of Rosamund Pike saying her character's name.
Moiraine, Moiraine, Moiraine.
So I think that probably sounds a little bit closer to how most of us are used to hearing it. I know I tend to be influenced by the audiobooks a lot, but also for whatever it's worth, the glossary in the back of the book clearly has it as Moiraine. Now, the other thing I would say is that we really don't know how it's going to sound in the show, and it's possible that we won't get one answer to that question because we're going to have different accents from different cultures and peoples around the continent, so there might be some variations in pronunciation. Rafe also touted a number of other people working with him among the directors and producers and writers, most notably Amanda Kate Schumann, who's his number 2 on production. And what was interesting about what he said about her is that she does not come from a fantasy background at all. And he goes a little bit further to say that he likes to have this mix of people in the writer's room. You have both people who have had a seminal experience reading The Wheel of Time and people who have no connection to it. And that makes for a better range of perspective and authenticity. And I hadn't really thought about it that specifically, but it makes a ton of sense because in the audience, you're going to have the same mix of people. And making sure that it works for both is a really tough job. So to hear Rafe talk about that a little bit more.
I think that balance really lets you remind yourself of the things that are important in there, the things that ring true, and not get too tied into the stuff that actually makes the adaptation worse than it would be because it's sort of fundamentally breaking things just to deliver them exactly as they are to TV.
Now comes my favorite thing that Rafe had to say throughout, maybe my favorite thing that Rafe has ever said.
I think you really need to know the end of your story when you start telling it. I think that's true for television, even though it's serialized and goes many years. Like I sat down and broke out what I thought 8 seasons of the show might look like before I started writing the pilot, because I felt like you have to build in this knowledge of where you're going and how you're getting there from the very beginning in order to tell the stories the best you can.
What I love about this is that he has a roadmap in mind for how he would adapt the entire series. The number 8 was kind of exciting to me because it happens to be the number that I estimated in this video. But honestly, we should not get hung up on that number because even if the show does get a full run, it might turn out to not be exactly 8. Maybe it would be actually 7 or 9, etc. because things can change. The point is not the number. The point is that he actually has thought through how to get to the end and an outline before he started at the beginning. It is my strongly held belief that shows that do this, that have a roadmap and an ideal number of seasons that they would do in a perfect world from the get-go, makes for better storytelling on TV. High concept shows that don't do this and try to spin their concept out for as long as possible always fall apart, in my opinion, and sometimes rather quickly. Some prominent examples of this for me were The Walking Dead, Westworld, and The Handmaid's Tale. On the other side are shows like The Good Place. Creator Michael Schur knew that he wanted to do 4 seasons from the get-go. And even though the show was popular and he could have done more, he stuck with his plan, and the result is 4 seasons that are basically perfect, in my opinion. But if he had tried to spin it out more, it's very likely that it could have all unraveled. But when you have an adaptation like The Wheel of Time that has an ending, it is all the more important that there is an overarching plan so that they don't run into a Game of Thrones situation. And the fact that Rafe Judkins knows this and is planning for it now makes me feel so much more confident in his vision. I honestly cannot emphasize enough how happy it makes me that he took the step of outlining 8 seasons before beginning the writing for season 1. The last answer from Rafe concerned the themes in the series and what sets it apart, and he talked about balance. I like this answer a lot because it moves it away from the traditional good versus evil in classic fantasy like Lord of the Rings. It's also not mainly about getting into the mucky, dark side of human nature like Game of Thrones. As he puts it, Wheel of Time sits in the fantasy pantheon as connective tissue between those other 2 well-known works. Wheel of Time explores the good and the evil within human nature, as well as many other dualities that exist within humanity. There's a focus on the miraculous things that can be achieved when there is balance among opposing elements, as well as the destruction that can be caused when dualities are out of balance. Overall, there was little of concrete new information in this interview, but I left feeling overall that, once again, the Wheel of Time is in the right hands, and that I think Rafe Judkins is choosing excellent people to work with him on it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the interview, on the poster, in the comments. Be sure to check out my other videos on how to adapt the Wheel of Time and what to expect from season 1. If you enjoyed this video, as always, like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, gird your loins, my friends.